what it did do, I think, was just readdress some of the doctrines that I had got confused over the years. And I always thought that, Mary Magdalene was the hooker.
Andrew, can you tell us about the genesis of this exhibit?
It was really inspired by an article that I read in the New York Times that was talking about how America's going through a culture war. And it also spoke about the role of Catholicism within the culture wars of the 1990s. And it really just got me thinking about the relationship between fashion and religion, but also the role of aesthetics within the Catholic Church. The idea behind the show was, on one level, to look at the influence of Catholic iconography and symbolism on fashion, but on a deeper level, to look at how, growing up Catholic, how that impacted their creative development.
Now this is a design based on something that I think many Catholics would know. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
This is addressed by Valentino Pierpaolo, also Catholic. That was inspired by the Capomania. This whole suite of mannequins was really inspired by the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, based on the colour. So the black of the priests, the red of the cardinals, and then the white of the Pope. And we wanted something to try and capture the idea of Catholic space within a museum context. So we use this sort of supernatural daylight to sort of capture the sort of profound experience that light has within a Catholic church or cathedral.
What do you hope a Catholic viewer or Catholic museum goer might take away from this show?
Catholics see the world through enchanted eyes, and that also resonated. And when I spoke to many of the designers who grew up Catholic, I think it was something that came as a surprise to them, even how much their Catholic upbringing, has impacted on their creative development.
Now you talked about your own Catholic upbringing. How did this show influence your own faith?
It was a good opportunity to debunk some of my own personal mythologies that I got confused over the years, but also reflect on a deeper level in terms of my own faith and what that means, and how that has affected my creative development at the same time. The theme of the medieval sculpture hall where we are now is looking at the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, but also the gender distinctions within the Catholic Church. So the examples behind us are designers who've been inspired by nuns' habits, particularly the Dominican nuns' habit, which I think most gravitate towards because of the graphic nature, but also her depictions in popular culture. I grew up Catholic, and I think that what I found so compelling in my youth and looking back about it was how Catholicism conveys really deep concepts, but it's reflected in these beautiful stories that are much more accessible, and the idea that Catholicism really is driven by a storytelling tradition. And again, that very much sort of resonated with the designers in the exhibition. The ones that are included do approach their work in this sort of storytelling narrative tradition, and how they see the world through the idea of metaphor. That metaphor is in a way the defining characteristic of the Catholic imagination.
I'm very curious about this one at the end. Could you tell us a little bit about one that looks very stylized and a little difficult to wear, maybe?
Yeah, this is a piece that was designed by Tom Brown, by the movie Sound of Music. So it started off with 42 women identically dressed in the habit, and 2 priests came along and undressed the nuns, and underneath were tweed suits that Julie Andrews would have, a depiction of Julie Andrews' suits as she left the convent.
At some point you had to approach the Vatican for their loans. How did that come about, and what was the process like?
It took about 2 years and 12 visits, and the main hurdle was really finding out who the right person was to speak to. The Met has a long-standing relationship with the Vatican. It took 4 visits to realise that the vestments we borrowed don't belong to the museum but the sacristy, because they're still in use. They were a little bit confused about the fashion side of the exhibition, but they were very taken with the idea of the Catholic imagination. So their only condition was that the vestments would be displayed separately from the fashions. And then their request was that they be displayed in a sort of white box. You know, Anna Wintour, who is one of our trustees, always compares the Met in terms of its complexity to the Vatican, and really I found out there was like no comparison. We're like a kindergarten compared to the Vatican.
Andrew, this is one of my favorite pieces in the whole show. Can you talk about this beautiful jacket that we're seeing?
So this jacket was designed by Gianni Versace, another Catholic. That was inspired by the micro-mosaics of various churches in and around Ravenna. Particularly, as you see here, direct references to Byzantine icons. So these actually belong to a different part of the museum, and we brought them in just to make that dialogue and that connection more explicit.
One thing a museum goer will notice as he or she walks around the show is that most of these pieces are from more recent decades. Do you think with growing secularity in the world that the influence of the Catholic imagination has diminished on fashion designers?
Oddly enough, I think there's a sort of a resurgence in the interest in Catholicism and particularly Catholic iconography. There is an inherent interest in the Vatican, within Catholicism, within the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, a sort of a romantic sort of approach to it. A lot of the designers in the exhibition are drawn to the sort of like romance of the Catholic Church. I believe, and I think it played out in the exhibition, that religion goes much deeper than just the embrace of doctrine. It really goes to the core.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for the care you took with this show, and also thank you for spending time with us at American Media.
Thank you very much.